Tilea's Troubles, Part 43. The Incident. Chapter 1. Near Viadaza, Summer's End, 2402. We have arrested all those we could find afterwards, both Campogrottans and Pavonans, Your Holiness, reported General D'Alessio. They are now in custody, awaiting your pleasure. At the very least, they are guilty of improper conduct and insubordination, at worst, mutiny and murder, although in the circumstances it might be unfair to consider them murderers, considering the provocation. Biagino noticed the general had chosen not to carry his famous broadsword, probably because it would be inappropriate for a meeting with the Arch-Lector. That, along with the blue sky, the pleasant surroundings of the gardens of the Palazzo Sebardia, and the absence of the stinking smoke of the last few days, made for a very welcome change. Compared to the scrape of steel upon steel, corpse burning in the dark and derelict city streets, and the threatening air of tension in the army camp, this afternoon felt almost civilized. The Palazzo Sebardia was situated a little south of Viadaza, constructed of the same grey stone as much of the city, and of a design similarly influenced by more northern architectural fashions. Atop the roof fluttered the Arch-Lector's standard, as he was in residence. A walled moat of calm, deep waters sat to the side, in which living fish still swam, and all around were full-grown trees to provide ample shade for those who sought it. There was, decided Biagino, no sign here at all of the nightmarish horrors that had gripped this realm, while the vampire lord and his foul forces had possessed it. Yet it was not possible to forget the war, for on the lawn immediately before the building stood a colour party, including an ensign, drummer, and sergeant, while many more of the Arch-Lector's guards were posted throughout the gardens. Crossbowmen watched the trees, while halberdiers stood sentinel at every door and along the wall of the moat, and they were not idle, for their eyes busily scoured the surroundings for any signs of trouble. "I cannot say whether we caught all those involved," continued the general. "It is likely some Pavonans slipped away before we could arrest them, creeping back into the mob gathered around the Campogrottan camp. Those we caught were nearly all wounded. The Campogrottan men were also badly mauled, leaving as many dead as injured. As for the brutes, there was not one left alive." "You accounted for all of the brutes?" asked the Lector of Viadaza, Bernardo Ugolini. "We think so, Your Excellency. There were no signs of ogres anywhere else in the camp. The art of concealment is not exactly their forte." Biagino laughed inside at the thought of an ogre attempting to conceal himself. It was an idea as ridiculous as the puppet play he had once seen, in which wooden-headed snotlings attempted to play chess. Perhaps engendered by his lack of sleep, this thought threatened to transform into an outward laugh, but he checked himself. The Arch-Lector gave a heavy sigh, then spoke the words of a prayer. "More guiders, more takers, and more keepers." Biagino wondered why this particular prayer had been chosen, in the end deciding it was most likely merely a general appeal to holy more in times of difficulty. Looking down at his clasped hands, left thumb over right, the Arch-Lector let his eyes lose focus for a long moment, while the others stood in respectful silence. Then he turned to fix the Captain-General with a direct gaze. "Now, General D'Alessio," he asked, "exactly what happened in the Campogrottans' camp?" For the briefest moment, D'Alessio looked uncomfortable, as if a sliver of doubt pricked at him. Then he continued, in the same matter-of-fact voice as before. "I hold myself partially to blame, for I had already noticed how the Campogrottan archers harboured bad feelings towards their brute comrades. I assumed it was nothing more than that which all men feel in the company of ogres. Of course, now, it is obvious in hindsight, these men were filled with hatred. They were most likely just biding their time until a chance arose to attack their brute and foreign oppressors. Campogrotta is a conquered realm, cruelly subjugated by a monstrous army. Perhaps Lord Niccolo sent the archers away simply to remove such potential trouble-causers from his realm, while simultaneously satisfying our insistent calls for soldiers to join the holy cause," said the Arch-Lector. "Yet, if so, then why did he also send 2 companies of ogres?" "That I do not know," admitted the general. "Nor, I think, shall we ever know, now that the ogres are dead. It may well be that they intended some sabotage, perhaps even to attack the Pavonans among us when news of their brethren's attack on Scorsio was received. In that way, such soldiers could not return to Trantio to harry the ogres from behind. If so, then it may well be a good thing that they were killed." The Arch-Lector regarded D'Alessio sternly. Like the lector standing behind him, he wore a wine-coloured, hooded cloak, although the cassock beneath was of a much richer velvet cloth, decorated with silken braids and golden zucchini. His hands were no longer clasped together as if in prayer, which Biagino took as a sign that His Holiness was not in the mood for ifs and maybes. Luckily, the general seemed to notice too, and returned to answering the question. "We will know more, Your Holiness, when we question those involved. Perhaps, by your leave, in a court-martial. For now, it seems that the Campogrottan archers, nearly to a man, took the news of the attack on Scorsio as a signal that they should begin the slaughter. They were joined in their bloody work by several Pavonans who had arrived with exactly the same slaughter in mind. The soldiers I sent to isolate the Campogrottan camp prevented any more Pavonans getting in, but it was too late. For although the handful that had already slipped through could not have prevailed alone against the brutes, allied with the Campogrottan archers, they were sufficiently strong to do so. Nevertheless, it was a hard fight, and the attackers were severely mauled, losing more than half their number. Apparently, both the Pavonans and the Campogrottans were willing to risk all in the attack." "I understand how they might feel," said the Arch-Lector, "what with their homes and families conquered by these brutish creatures. But still, the brutes were here to do Moor's work, and fought hard in the cause, and that work is not done yet." "I understand, General, that military discipline must be maintained, but there is more to this. We have an abomination in the north. Every living being has a duty to cleanse this world of the undead scourge. All right-thinking people know this is so. Each life given in this holy war is well received by Moor. Each life wasted in petty squabbles over possessions, pride, or plunder is an insult to his name. Tell me, did young Lord Silvano order this attack upon the brutes?" General D'Alessio shook his head. "My officers have yet to ascertain the details, but as far as I know, he does not seem to have done so, not directly at least. And he certainly did not lead it. None of our men witnessed him at the camp. His soldiers were disorganized, driven by their anger rather than an officer's commands. He may otherwise have encouraged the attack, or simply allowed it to happen. He might have been entirely ignorant of it. We've yet even to establish his whereabouts at the time." The Arch-Lector turned his gaze and reached out his right hand in the gesture of free speech. "Father Biagino, I left many of my trusted advisers in Remus. You have seen more horrors than them, and perhaps prayed all the harder as a consequence for Holy Moor's guidance. I would have your counsel, if you would give it. You have spent much time in Lord Silvano's company. He joined our crusade eagerly, I know that. But does he truly serve Moor? Will he stay with us, or will we be forced to let him go?" Biagino had found the young lord likeable, open and honest. But whether he would order such an attack as this, however, who could say? Luckily, the Arch-Lector was not asking that. "The young lord does appear devout in his service to Moor," Biagino said. "He has his own confessor, of course, and has never spoken to me of any Sagranalian heresies or schismatical beliefs. I took his willingness to join our crusade as a sign that he was happy to be guided by your Holiness and the true Church. In truth, although he never expressed this exact thought, I believe he would rather fight a holy war against the undead than die like his brother in a vendetta against the living. Yet—" Here Biagino faltered, and it was the Arch-Lector who picked up his thought, repeating the earlier question. "Yet will he leave now that Trantio is threatened?" "That I cannot say for certain, Your Holiness," admitted Biagino, "but I think it likely he will. He's proud to be the Gonfaloniere of Trantio, even if the honour is clouded by his brother's death. Now he has learned of Scorsio's suffering, and the very great threat to Trantio, he must surely be torn between continuing this holy war and defending that which he rules. He swore oaths to do both, and in his naivety, I suppose, he never envisaged how the two duties might conflict. But the boy loves his father, and furthermore he can see no wrong in the man. In the end, I think his filial duty will probably win out." The Lector of Viadaza stepped forward to address the Arch-Lector. "If I may speak, Your Holiness, we can do nothing to stop Lord Silvano leaving if he so wishes, and in the light of his rank as the noble son and heir of the ruler of a sovereign state, we have no rightful authority to try him. Even if we did, how could we weigh one oath made before the gods against another? If we had evidence that he himself espoused heretical doctrine, then we might proceed against him under church law. If he ordered this attack, and we chose to see it as the act of an enemy, then we could make him our prisoner, our hostage. But in so doing, we would be declaring war against his father, which is surely madness, what with the vampire duchess north of us, and now the tyrant Boulderguts to the south. We have more than enough enemies already." Biagino was not surprised to hear Lector Bernardo talk so easily of the Campergrottan ogres as enemies. The Arch-Lector had not actually declared them so, yet now they had begun burning and robbing a second Tilean state, which, like Rivola, had in no way provoked them, nor offended them, then they were clearly enemies of all mankind. "Lord Silvano is indeed untouchable in terms of military law," said General D'Alessio. "He is the commander of his own army, sworn as a willing ally, not as a serving soldier who is duty-bound to obey my every command. If he merely lost control of his men, we cannot prosecute him. If he failed to keep some vow, that only shames him. And if he ordered the killing of the ogres, that is nothing more than a lord seeking retribution for crimes committed against him and his own. However, with his permission, we could proceed with a court-martial concerning his men's actions, if only to question them." "What would that gain, General?" asked Lector Bernardo. "We have a war to fight. Can we waste time with inquiries?" When all turned to hear what the Arch-Lector had to say, Calictus again allowed a long moment to pass, as if he were reaching out silently for some guidance. Biagino wondered if the Arch-Lector could feel More's presence, not through riddle-filled dreams as he himself experienced, but rather to know the god's will directly. If a lowly priest such as himself was blessed with divine visions, surely the highest-ranking clergyman in the church had access to much, much more. There was no way of knowing, of course, whether the Arch-Lector was merely weighing his adviser's words, or indeed waiting for God-given guidance. When Calictus's attention returned to his company, his eyes seemed to light up, as if an amusing thought had tickled him. "Good Lector Bernardo," he said, "you have shown your grasp of the situation. I have no desire to do anything more than offer advice and friendship to Lord Silvano and his father." Then he turned to Biagino. "And, good father, not only do I think you see much more than most when you look upon a mortal, it seems to me that More has guided you, blessed you, so that his will might manifest itself through you. I pray it will always do so. You both speak wisely. We must recognize the inevitable, move with it rather than against it, and so should aim to support Lord Silvano if he moves south to retake Scorsio." "Might I ask, Your Holiness," inquired Lector Bernardo, "how can we make this situation serve More's greater purpose?" "First, we must bring this matter of unrest in our army to a close, without making any more enemies than we already have. General, you may hold a court-martial. I cannot imagine if you inform the young lord it is my wish that he will argue. We must be seen to follow a proper process, and the rule of law must prevail. Let the Pavonans and Campogrottans express their anger, explain their justification, and—" here he paused, perhaps to ensure they all registered what words followed, "it will hopefully become very clear to all that Lord Silvano was innocent of mutiny." He turned to the Lector of Viadaza. "Bernardo, I would have you attend, for the deed was done within your diocese, and by soldiers serving in More's holy army." Both Bernardo and General D'Alessio bowed. "What sentence do I pass when their deeds are revealed?" asked the general. Again, Biagino saw a glimpse of humour in the Arch-Lector's eyes. "The Pavonans should of course be returned to their own camp, there to be dealt with as Lord Silvano sees fit. The Campogrottans will be found guilty of misconduct and will await my pleasure. In the meantime, I shall consider how best to deal with them." It seemed to Biagino that the Arch-Lector already knew full well what he intended to do, although no one but the Arch-Lector could know exactly what that was. The incident continued. Chapter 2. Court-martial. Within the city of Viadaza. The gnomish clerk of the court was bringing the legal preamble to a close, his somewhat squeaky voice being both audible and authoritative, despite its inauspicious nature.
And as the matter to be investigated concerns soldiers serving different sovereign princes, so that none of their own officers has authority over all the parties involved, then General Urbano d'Alessio will himself act as judge, in that he carries the baton of command over all brigades granted him by the authority of the Arch-Lector.
Biagino was not one of those Morite clergy officially attending the trial, for that honour fell to the Lector Bernardo and the lesser priests under his immediate jurisdiction. Needless to say, there were not many priests, 2 to be exact. Times had been more than hard for all Viadazans, including the clergy. So much so, in fact, that some of the previously walking corpses cremated over the last week wore grey and red priestly robes, ragged and filthy, but still recognisable. That priests of More might become the living dead was beyond most Tileans' imaginations, yet it had happened here, in this hellish place. Ever since witnessing the corpses in question, Biagino himself had struggled to free his mind of concern. The square in which the interrogation was to be held was not large. It was made smaller by the collapse of the building lining its southern side. Biagino wondered whether the damage occurred during the burning of the corpses, the recent siege, or the earlier fall of Viadaza to the undead. Attempts had been made to tidy the rubble, creating a kind of wall behind which a group of observers had gathered, Biagino amongst them. Several of the Arch-Lector's own liveried bodyguards were scattered about the place, a drummer to beat the appropriate rudiments as prisoners were brought forward and removed, an ensign to bear the Arch-Lector's standard, and the others to escort the prisoners and guard the various portals around the square. A second gnome assisted the clerk, while a priest of More was ready with a holy book upon which those to be examined might swear an oath that they would speak the truth. As Biagino stepped forwards to get a better look, the first soldier to be examined was being brought into place. When the prisoner and the guard came to a halt, Biagino noticed a large stone block behind them, decorated with chains and manacles. Now he knew why this particular square had been chosen. It had obviously served a similar purpose in the past, back when Viadaza was filled with a living populace rather than soldiers and ghosts. The prisoner was a Pavonan, his blue and white quartered garb unmistakable. Only Campogrottans sported a similar livery, and there were none of them in the Holy Army. Unlike most prisoners Biagino had seen over the years, this man was clean, combed, his linen unstained. The court might be going through all the usual motions, but it was obvious that the sort of backstage cruelty and deprivation that was a prisoner's usual lot had not been inflicted. Once the Pavonan had sworn his oath, he was ordered to give an account of what had occurred. "It weren't anything," he said, an element of disdain evident in his tone. "We heard what the brutes had done and decided we'd teach them a lesson." "You decided?" asked the General. "Not Lord Silvano?" "Lord Silvano wasn't with us when we heard the news. We didn't need him to tell us what must be done. Besides, to find him out would have meant delay, and we were in no mood for that. They say patience is a virtue, but not always." "So you were acting without orders?" suggested General d'Alessio. The soldier nodded. "The brutes were revealed as enemies in our midst. No doubt with some bloody intention to add to the deeds done at Scorsio. We did what had to be done, and we did it quickly. It was what Lord Silvano would have wished." The General raised his hand to silence the soldier, his face registering annoyance. "Never mind what you think Lord Silvano wanted. Answer me straight. Did Lord Silvano give orders to attack the Campogrottan brutes?" The Pavonan's confidence was ebbing. He glanced around as if to look for help. No, Your Excellency. He gave us no orders." The General gestured to the gnomish clerk. "Write that down," he commanded. As the gnome did so, his scribbling hand unfaltering, he raised his bushy eyebrows, registering a kind of surprise. Biagino noticed and smiled. The gnome was no doubt thinking, "What do you think I'm doing?" "Did Lord Silvano In any way indicate that it was his intention that you attack the brutes?" asked General D'Alessio. "He's gone fell on the area of Trantio, and Scorsio is his to rule. He would not want the comrades of those who had attacked his own possessions to go unpunished. We did—" "Quiet!" barked the general, "and listen. This time I want you to answer the question put to you, and that question alone. You have ears, use them." The Pavonan nodded, now clearly discomfited. The general waited a moment, taking a breath as if to compose himself, and then asked, "Did Lord Silvano, in any way whatsoever, encourage, embolden, or advise you to do this deed? Did he either indicate his happiness at your intentions, or so much as suggest that you might do as you wished?" "No and no," said the soldier. "He couldn't see, because Captain Manoli took him away upon some errand before anyone could tell him what had happened." So that's why young Lord Silvano had not been present at the incident, Biagino thought. His men had tricked him away, perhaps to prevent him from interfering, or to ensure no blame could be put on him, or both. General D'Alessio was not subtle in his satisfaction. He brought his hands together in a clap and turned once again to look at the gnome. Before he could speak, however, the gnome, without lifting his eyes or even pausing his quill pen, said,
"I am writing it down."
Biagino almost laughed at this. Gnomes had often had a comical way about them, a kind of pride, manifesting most often as sarcasm or rudeness. They were very good at what they did, yet men had a tendency to confuse their squeaky voices and short stature with childishness. He could see behind the general's subsequent fixed expression, but he knew the man well enough to know it was more likely to be an attempt to conceal his own mirth rather than anger at the gnome's impertinence. General D'Alessio now turned to the crowd to make a short speech. "This man acted without his commander's orders, neither mine nor Lord Silvano's. Lord Silvano bears no blame for the deed. This man speaks for himself and the rest of the Pavonans involved in this incident. It is not my place to discipline another lord's soldiers, and so this man and the rest will be returned to their camp, there to suffer whatsoever punishment Lord Silvano sees fit to inflict. They are his to do with as he pleases." Addressing the guard, standing behind the prisoner, he added, "Take him away." Biagino was surprised at the speed at which the investigation had been conducted. Of course, he knew that all those officiating had already been briefed as to what must be done, and that the whole event was for show, but he had thought the general might make more of an effort to appear thorough in his examination. Still, there was a war to fight against a most terrible enemy, and thus little time to waste on the niceties of tradition and procedure. He watched as the Pavonan was led away, and a Campogrottan brought to stand in his place. This man, too, had an air of defiance about him, like the Pavonan had when first brought forward, but his eyes revealed a nervousness. He was dressed in a colourful green and yellow doublet and a blue artisan's hat. His hands were bound before him with rope, and he was prodded into place by a helmeted, hammer-bearing Riemann soldier. Biagino knew this Campogrottan was on much shakier ground than the Pavonan, for he and his comrades had no officers they could be returned to. They had killed their commanders when they killed the ogres. The gnomish clerk declared that this man had been chosen to speak for himself and his comrades, then read out the man's name, describing him as a retinue archer. The general seemed intrigued by this, asking, "A retinue archer? Whose retinue?" "Sir Bruno Delilah, Knight of the Hollow Order." "There are no knights in your company." "No, Your Excellency. The brutes killed them all." The general nodded gravely. "And this was the cause of your action?" "It was, Your Excellency. Lord Niccolo and his servant, Boulderguts, have killed or imprisoned every noble in our realm, lord, lady, and child, excepting those who managed to flee or hide, which were not that many. The brutes stole the whole of Campogrotta, enslaving every living soul they found, and then they took Rivola and stole all they could from her too. Now they've set upon Trantio. They'll burn the whole of Tilea if they're not stopped." "You have grievances aplenty," acknowledged General D'Alessio. "I see that plainly. But you had no orders, and certainly no right to take matters into your own hands. You are soldiers serving in this holy army of Moor, and ought properly to have awaited instruction. We would have dealt with the brutes as best we saw fit. The archer stared down at his feet. Biagino wondered whether the act of rebellion had given the man any real satisfaction, considering all that he had likely lost to the brutes, family at home, comrades here. It was a small revenge for the cruel conquest of an entire principality. The archer could hardly be said to look proud about what he had done. Or, thought Biagino, perhaps he was simply afraid of the potentially brutal consequences of being caught disobeying orders in a time of war. "Look now," commanded the general. "You will tell us exactly what happened. Speak." The man winced, then began his tale. "News came of what had happened at Scorsio. Brute Gollig was one of the first to hear it. He was laughing, which wasn't like him, and I wondered what was so funny. Then Enzo, who'd heard what had been said, stepped up to him and stuck him with a knife, deep into his belly, beside the metal plate. That stopped the laughing, but of course it didn't put Gollig down. He broke Enzo's neck with a backhanded blow. Then started shouting that we were all maggots, and asking who else wanted a slap. I could see he wasn't himself, but whether that was the knife still buried in him, or because he knew there was going to be trouble now that he and his kind had become enemies of the very army that they were serving with, I know not. Enzo's brother, Luca, sent an arrow to accompany the knife. Then umpteen lads started filling him with shafts too. Even before he fell, some of the others had run into the brutes' tents to cut their throats before they woke properly. And some managed it, but not all. And those brutes that survived were roused by the noise and began fighting back. A lot of us were killed. We were hard pressed. And it were going bad for us until the Pavonans turned up and joined in. They had halberds, which cut broad and deep, and the blood flowed freely. It wasn't easy, and a lot of good men died. But together, we did what had to be done. Killed every one of them. It went very quiet in the square. For a moment Biagino thought that there might be applause for the prisoner, but none came. He sensed it was being held in check. There was probably no one present who had anything but respect for the prisoner. General D'Alessio glanced over at the gnomish clerk, still scribbling at the paper. Then he spoke. "In light of the cruel tyranny of Bolderguts and his ogres, and their treacherous attack to the south of us, I am minded to excuse your actions. You and your comrades have shown courage, and were willing to suffer as a consequence. Also, I would have it known that you bear no blame for the attack upon Scorsio. But I cannot forgive your indiscipline. Soldiers should act upon orders, not upon impulse. Therefore, I hereby judge that you will serve a term of parole under conditions to be set by myself and the Council of War according to His Holiness's will. This court-martial is adjourned." Biagino was once again surprised by the abruptness with which the general brought things to a close. He knew exactly what the Arch-Lector had ordered, that the Pavonans be released into the custody of their own commander, and that the Campogrottans be freed only on provision that they continue to serve the Arch-Lector in whatever capacity he saw fit. Yet he had not realised how quickly such a declaration would be made. Only 2 out of 3 dozen men had been questioned, and neither had been pressed to reveal anything other than what they wanted to say. Perhaps this was the military way? No room for lawyers and cross-examination, no place for bickering, wrangling and disputation. Not that he was unhappy about it, for now they could get back to the important matter of waging war against the vampires. Or should that be the war against vampires and ogres?